It is Thursday. It's just after 4 o'clock, and it is time for Breakdown of the Bones. And it seemed only fitting that we had a pinch hitter for Dr. Max Sally today. And of all the folks we could welcome on the day where we're celebrating Gerrit Cole and his many fantastic accomplishments in 2023, we welcome on Dr. Mike Mulligan. Dr. Mulligan, good afternoon to you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I want to wish you congratulations because though Gerrit Cole did win the Cy Young Award, we know that you are the one that was really deserving of the accolades and the recognition here today. I just have to get your thoughts. Have you come down from cloud nine seeing the way that Cole was recognized?
No, I haven't. I was on call last night, and I didn't get much sleep, but usually that makes me unhappy. But I was very happy because Gerrit Cole, unanimous Cy Young. They're all 31st place votes, which is awesome.
Yeah, remarkable to see that kind of – it's well-deserved recognition, but I have to kind of get your quick thoughts before we go into some of the injuries happening on what's been happening the last couple of weeks between what Hal Steinbrenner had to say and then all of the things that Brian Cashman had to say. It's been a weird couple weeks for your group in New York.
Yeah, but I think to credit Cashman a bit, even though we've made fun of him a lot, and you guys have talked about it ad nauseum, I think he's being a little bit more honest. I think you're seeing a little bit more of just not the party line from him. He got a little emotional in the one press conference, and then all these comments recently about Giancarlo Stanton. And he's being honest,
right.
And sometimes you're saying, hey, if you're in a position like that, there are certain things you can say and not say.
Yeah.
I think he's been doing this a long enough time where, he doesn't do things by accident. So perhaps it's a little bit of a nudge to kind of maybe make him want to be like, okay, I want to prove him wrong this year,
right.
sort of.
Right.
So maybe there's an angle there. I know it had the downstream effect of his agent came out and made those comments, and his agent happens to be that one for the new Japanese pitcher, so is that going to affect their ability to sign players this offseason?
Right.
Listen, if the money's there, they're going to sign players. We all know that. So,
yeah.
I think it was just Cashman kind of being honest, things we've said on this program about Stanton and the need for him to kind of play every day because that keeps him, I think, better conditioned and mentally better engaged. But the writing's on the wall. You look at just the stats, I think it's around 40% of games he's missed in the last several years.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's that's an impressive amount. So you have to do something to build the team, and I think that's what he was saying. You have to anticipate the potential of, if he's only been there for less than 50% of the games or so, you have to have a good backup option at DH that's not like a Willie Calhoun or flash in the pan player that you hope catches on. It can't be Jake Bauers, it can't be Willie Calhoun. You have to have somebody as a backup option for him at DH, and so we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. Indeed, I appreciate the perspective there. Maybe the honesty does end up being a good thing. But I do want to move into one of the more major injuries in the sports world right now. It was also good timing that we were able to catch up with you this week because of all the things that we have discussed, good, bad, and otherwise, things that have had Charlie and I running for the trash can in our studio with the graphic detail that we hear about. I cannot say that I've ever heard of a glenoid and a glenoid fracture, which is what Deshaun Watson is dealing with, something that he will have surgically repaired and that will end his season. What does that mean, and what does it mean for the quarterback when you hear an injury like that?
Yeah, so that was very interesting for a couple of reasons. So I'll start with a brief anatomy lesson to the listeners. The glenoid is a portion of the shoulder blade bone that's called the scapula.
Okay.
The glenoid is actually the joint surface part of the shoulder where that scapula meets the humerus. So we think about the main part of the shoulder as the ball and socket joint. So essentially the glenoid is that socket, okay?
Oh, okay.
And so but it's important because it's into the joint. So in anything, whether it's an athlete or not, when we're dealing with fractures around a joint, that has a lot more narrow window of, okay, is it displaced or not? Do we need to fix a fracture that's in the joint? We're much more, we want to restore that joint surface more as a priority, and most of the injuries that we take care of as orthopedic surgeons.
Right.
So what's interesting about about his is that, I did a little bit of research for prep here, and he was out with that same shoulder for a few weeks, and missed some time.
Right.
But they didn't necessarily say what the injury was, and then you got to say, okay, is it related? And he went out of that game with an ankle, and then people were more worried about his ankle, but he came back, and then it was a shock to everybody when it came out a couple of days ago that he's got a displaced glenoid fracture that they saw on the MRI. So there's a couple of different paths you can go down as to speculate in an athlete as to how you would get this.
Yeah.
Any traumatic event, we can see glenoid fractures in high mechanism injuries, falls, things like that, because it usually takes a lot to break the scapula bone anywhere, because the scapula bone is like on the chest wall. So it's usually a pretty hard bone and a high energy trauma to the chest and shoulder region to really break the glenoid from that kind of a trauma. But that's one way you can see it. So it's theoretically possible that a fall that he took or a hit that he took and he kind of impacted the humerus into the socket could have caused that mildly displaced fracture. Another that could be the more feasible reason is, we hear about shoulder dislocations, and I'm sure Dr. Alley has talked about those before on the program.
Oh, yeah.
When you have a shoulder dislocation, especially in a young person, a young athlete, that can do a couple of different things. A lot of times it is just soft tissue that is torn when you dislocate a shoulder and then it's put back into place. And then it gets into discussions of what's called the labrum, which is kind of like the lining of that glenoid. It's a cartilage lining. It kind of deepens it. It increases the surface area and increases stability to that shoulder.
Sure.
And so when you dislocate a shoulder, you can have a labral tear, and that's called like a Bankart lesion. There's like a famous person that was named after that coined that phrase of a Bankart. Well, you can have something called a bony Bankart, and essentially because those ligaments attach to the glenoid and the humerus, you could pull off a little piece of bone with a dislocation or a partial dislocation type event. So that may be what he's dealing with, and then kind of he re-injured it and then caused that bony Bankart, or maybe it's been there and they've been watching it, and then now it's kind of refractured, so now they know they really have to go in. So there's a lot of speculation about it, but you can see the glenoid injuries with that spectrum of a shoulder dislocation or partial dislocation, or you can see it from direct blow trauma or high energy trauma where the fracture kind of the ball of the ball and socket joint, the humerus, kind of drives into the glenoid and then breaks that socket surface.
Phew! Goodness gracious. Okay, before we continue, the voice you're hearing is that of Dr. Mike Mulligan. This is Breakdown of the Bones here on The Drive with Charlie and Dan, 104.5 The Team, ESPN Radio. Go to boneandjointcenter.com for more information about the 7 convenient locations, including an urgent care across the street from the university at Albany. So we know what it is. Now I'm curious for Deshaun Watson, what is next? The procedure comes first, and then what does that kind of procedure look like, and how do you envision a recovery for this kind of injury looking?
Well, if you were already feeling nauseous just talking about how it happened, so the surgery is a pretty big deal because
okay.
Hold on,
let me get my trash can real quick, just in case.
A lot of the sports stuff that we talk about can be done arthroscopically. And there's a chance that this one can, but more likely than not, to really visualize that glenoid, you're potentially doing an open approach. So if it's at all feasible, they're going to try to do it through the scope, where they make portals on the outside, and then through one portal you're looking with a camera, and then through other portals you have your instruments that are working to fix this thing. And it'll likely be some small screws to capture it that are what we call headless. Because when you're dealing with a fracture around the joint surface, you can't leave think about a screw that you get at Home Depot. You can't have the head of that screw inside a joint. It's going to rub on the cartilage. It's going to cause more problems. So, we have the technology of things called headless screws where we're able to bury them below the cartilage surface but still get compression across the fracture. Mm-hmm. And so that's likely what he's going to have done, a combination of some anchors or these headless screws that tack that glenoid back down.
Wow.
But then the rehab-wise, you're then talking, so depending on if there's any open incision, you're worried about soft tissue healing. If they're able to do it through a scope, it's more minimally invasive. But really, it's the timetable, and that's why they said the season's done, because we've talked about fractures. We give a ballpark of about 6 weeks of bone healing,
Yep.
and then you have to worry about after that, getting the mobility and the strength back in the shoulder and the rehab that goes along with that. So you're talking several months. So that's why it's a no-brainer. If he's having this glenoid fix, he's done for the season.
Okay, that all makes sense, and yeah, the timeline just doesn't add up to where you even if this happened earlier on, because now we're 10 weeks in, you'd probably still be done, even
unless you're Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah,
then you'll be potentially coming back 3 months after Achilles, like they're talking about. So we'll see how that goes. We've
discussed this before. How is it possible, or is it possible that he's just grinning and bearing? Like, when you see him doing these 2-step drops on the field before games, like, how is it possible that we're even having this conversation, given the way that it looked like his Achilles just exploded on that play? How is this possible?
I
know I'm springing this one on you, but I'm just curious
it's all
what
good.
you say.
And, foot and ankle, it's more, Dr. Rosenbaum's territory. But, I think that with the technique that potentially we've heard about he's had, where they do the repair, but then they kind of augment it with this kind of internal brace thing. And we've talked about that before. I talk about it in the thumb, where I'll fix the ligament in the thumb. That's important. When Brett Beatty had his, but then you do this internal brace thing where you're almost giving them an artificial tendon or ligament, essentially, while your native one heals.
Oh, yes.
And so any component of that they've done can give him the potential to go back a little bit sooner. I would just, if I were the doctors, it's obviously something where if this goes well and you let him back a little early and he doesn't re-rupture, that you're feeling good.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're cringing,
Yeah.
Because one thing we don't really talk about here is, when you deal with these really, and I know where he had this done. In fact, one of my former residents is one of the current fellows out there at Curl and Job out
no kidding.
in UCLA. Yeah.
Wow.
I got an awesome VIP picture of the outside of the Dodgers locker room from him when he covered his first game, because he knows how much I'm a baseball guy. But
right.
But it's one of those things where these guys are under a lot of pressure too. The surgeons that are doing this, they have a reputation, of being like the best of the best, and the surgeons to the athletes. And it's pretty high profile, because we all have complications, and we all have, things that maybe don't have the best outcome, or we don't get them back quite to the level that they were before. And that's not anybody's fault, other than just, it's a pretty significant injury.
Right.
But that would make me nervous, with all the talk of him potentially getting back as early as a few months. Definitely would make me nervous.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine what I'm seeing. I cannot fathom what the reality seems to be. But
he also has that holistic thing, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And maybe he's found something that's not illegal, but at the same time miraculously healing him, the fountain of youth. Who knows? I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers, right?
Yeah, that's right. The inoculated Aaron Rodgers. Don't let us ever forget the turn of phrase there. But before we let you go, as is always the case here on Breakdown of the Bones, do you have a tip of the week for us?
I do. It seems simple, but we've got a big holiday coming up next week, I think.
Oh, yes. One of my favorites, and possibly one of the most underrated holidays of the year. I don't know where you fall on that, but I feel like as soon as Halloween's done, the Christmas stuff is out, and Thanksgiving just gets completely overlooked, and I can't stand it.
Right. I mean, I know you guys talked about it. I can't do the Christmas music thing until after Thanksgiving. I agree with you.
1,000% with you.
Right.
100%. Right. Anyways, with that being said.
So my tip is this. Carving is important. It's kind of a rite of passage. Grandpa does it, then Dad, and then when it's your house and you're hosting the 20 people, it's your responsibility.
Right.
My advice is, and it could be female. I don't want to be disparaging at all.
Of course.
That could be who gets the responsibility. But my point is, whoever is carving that turkey, actually, it's counterintuitive that this is a safety tip, but actually make sure the knife is sharp.
Ooh, yeah.
Because when we see the few injuries that we'll see from person cutting something, it's usually because the knife is dull and you're really not you're pushing through it. You need a sharp knife. Make sure your knives are sharpened, because that's where the injuries happen, is when it's a dull blade and then you're trying to cut that thing and you slip, and then you see us. So sharpen the knife before you carve the turkey. That's my tip of the week.
What is the best cure for a food coma?
Football.
There you go. And a nap somewhere in the first one when the Green Bay Packers fall apart in their first game against
right.
the
Well,
Lions.
thankfully, I haven't looked at the schedule, but I don't think are either of our teams playing, because it's hard for me to watch them anyway.
No.
Okay.
No, the Bills are on. The Bills are Sunday afternoon. I know the Jets are on the Jets are on the Friday, the Black Friday game.
That should be interesting.
The three, Jets and Dolphins on that game, and I believe the Giants are also on Sunday. But either way, won't have to deal with the tragedy that is New York football right now. But Dr. Mulligan, thank you as always for your time. This is Breakdown of the Bones here on The Drive with Charlie and Dan. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, and hopefully the next time we have you on the show, there is some Yankees hot stove news that we can talk about too.
I would love that. I don't care if it's Juan Soto, Cody Bellinger. We need some left-handed hitting, so let's go.